Hey everyone, welcome to Kentico Rocks podcast. This is episode number 30. And man, I can't believe we've got 30 episodes already of Kentico Rocks. But the podcast is all about Kentico, Kentico Kontent, .NET and Azure, and just what's going on in the general Kentico community. I'm excited today because I have a few guests, but I guess I should say this is your host, Brian McKeiver, as always. And with me, I actually have the first two Kentico employees to join the party of Kentico Rocks. And I'm excited because it's always great to have someone on the actual product teams and evangelist teams to join me. But go ahead, Ondrej, introduce yourself. Tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me. I'm actually also excited because I've been listening to your podcast since I can't remember when. And this is also my first time joining. So, hey, everyone. I'm Ondrej Polesny. I'm a developer evangelist at Kentico Kontent. And I'm also a former .NET developer who did not write too many unit tests. So that's something that I'm looking forward to.
Okay, I'm Michal Vanzura. I work at Kentico for about 5 years. I work as a senior QA engineer. So my job is to ensure that the quality is high and everything is working as the customers would expect.
Great.
And that's about it.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ondrej. So yeah, I guess we should actually probably say what the episode is about. Episode 30 today is going to be about JavaScript unit testing. And that is a mouthful, right? But it's something that is becoming more and more popular in the development world. And actually it's been around for quite a while, I'd say. And I think this is interesting for me because, like Ondrej, I was a .NET developer and am a .NET developer right now. And I focus a little bit more on the back-end side of things. And how we integrate Kentico and .NET and Azure and things like that. So I don't do too much on the front end. And I'm excited to have these two gentlemen join me because they may have a little bit different experience. And hopefully we can answer the question today of what is JavaScript unit testing? Why would you use it? And maybe how would you start using it if you're new to it? So this is great because I'm the perfect subject for this discussion. We can have some honesty about, okay, well, I'm not actually sure what this is, but let's learn a little bit more. And that's the plan today. We're just going to have this conversation about what is the testing capabilities, why to use it, how to get started even a little bit. So, right away, I'm going to, I think, take the first question and ask you, Ondrej, what do you think of when you hear the term unit testing, and then maybe specifically like JavaScript unit testing? What comes to mind? What's the first thing that you think about?
First thing that I think about when you say that is nobody does that. But that's just my experience, from the past, because developers usually just work on the implementation when it comes to testing. And I don't want to say this about all developers. I know that there's a lot of people that actually do these things properly, but some of the developers that I talk to, they just tell me, well, I don't need testing. I know it works. I know when I implemented that thing, I tested it, so I don't need to spend more time on testing. I don't even have time to do the implementation. So that will be the first thing that comes to mind.
Michael, what about you?
Well, for me, it's completely different. I try to force the developers to write the test, so I'm on the opposite side. But in my opinion, in Kentico, the developers actually write the test. It's in the definition of done, and everybody's doing it. So I don't have the experiences Ondrej has.
Now, I'm interested, Michael, when you tell them that you need to do this, we must do this for ensure quality. Do you get any pushback? Do they see the value of doing the tests, or is it a pretty easy conversation? And oh yeah, of course we're going to write tests.
Well, it took some time, but eventually they see the value.
Good.
In the unit tests, they are quite accustomed to write them. We are a bit struggling with, for example, UI tests, but they are getting there.
Well, that's a great point too, because I think when you classically think about unit testing, you think about Test Runner in Visual Studio if you're in the .NET world, or other kind of normal back-end testing where you have logic in code and you can make a nice assertion and assume that, yes, when this runs, it's either going to work or not work, and we're going to do that at compile time, and it's going to allow us to ensure that functions work the right way. But where I think technology is today and how things are shifting more and more to the front end, and the user experience is so important when we talk about quality interfaces, accessibility for standards, SEO, all of that is something that's more front end and not really classically testable on the back end. And I think that's where JavaScript unit testing comes in, right? Would you guys agree that having the UI layer as a testable feature is more important today than it was years ago?
So I can take that probably. So there are three things that we're kind of mixing together right now. So first of those is unit testing. The second one is integration testing. And the third one is functional testing. Mm. And unit testing is just testing units, right? So it's not like when you open a browser and you test whether the website is rendered correctly or whether the element is existing somewhere. Unit testing is really about testing just single small units from the point of developer. So if I have a method there that makes multiplication of two numbers, that's a perfect candidate for a unit test. And when you do take these things, these small modules or functions, and you put them together into a bigger system that, for example, contacts a serverless function or stores something in the database or integrates it in any other third-party service, then we're talking about integration testing, right? Because we're talking about integrating multiple of these modules together. And the thing that you mentioned, Brian, about testing the UI and how the user actually sees that is more in terms of the functional testing. Because functional testing, we're looking at the application or the project from the user's point of view. So we're not testing really what the developer thinks it should be doing, but we're testing the system from the other side, from the point of view of the user, whether the application works for him well. So maybe that's a bit of a confusion here when we talk about JavaScript unit testing. It's not really about testing if an alert box pops up, but it's also about testing the small units that are in code. So it's very much similar to what we were used to test in .NET, I would say, or at least that's my experience as a former .NET dev. But maybe Michal will be able to shed more light on that.
I'm not sure. You have really good points. I don't really know what to add to it.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic definition, and it does pretty much clear it up. And I've always thought of the second one you mentioned as the integration of testing of whenever an application needs to talk to a database or whenever two applications connect together. The functional testing description you said makes sense as well. I think that it's interesting that in general, when I talk to our clients and other developers in the Kentico community, people talk in terms of like just testing. Are you doing automated testing or unit testing? And then having the clear definition, I think, is very helpful to people. And I'm going to start talking more intelligently about it myself. So, so is there anything that someone needs to know if they want to really focus on maybe functional testing being from the other's point of view? Maybe can we use that to ensure quality in Michael's case, or can we use it to validate business requirements fairly easily? And does it change, like, how do you have to write your interface or your front end or your JavaScript in your guys' experience, since you've been doing it a little bit more than me?
I will take this one. I think that definitely you have to change the approach, how you write things. But the beauty of the testing the things is that you write the code that is more readable, more sustainable. It's just better code because it is testable. And from my experience, when I started at Kentico, most of the JavaScript code was in code behind, in string, interpolated right into the C# code. And then we started doing some required JS modules, and now we are working with Angular and React, and it's very great how now the code is testable with these new libraries and options.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point too, Michael. That like I think when we say better code and more testable, one of the reasons for that is you have to write it in a way that dependencies are a lot clearer, right? Or almost out of the logic that you want to test, so that something can be testable.
Yeah, you make the logic parts more visible, and I think it's just better code as a whole.
Yep. And I think a few developers that I've talked to have taken it even to the level of doing, test-driven development, where they only write the tests first to make things happen,
Mhm.
and then write the code after the tests are passing. Now, I don't personally have experience with that, but do you guys do it that way at all?
Well, we do it sometimes in our team when there is a clear description of the task that needs to be done. It's very good approach. But when the story is a little bit blurry and you need to talk with a lot of guys, maybe it's not the best approach, in my opinion.
Ondrej, what about you?
Well, I have to say, when I used to do .NET, and I still do that, but not in the same amount of work as I used to. I was at first I did not really like writing unit tests or any other tests, because we were doing a lot of integration testing as well. We were creating the database models in memory and testing the whole app. But over time, I actually came on board with the unit testing, and in the end, I was writing the unit tests before the implementation. So the greatest benefit that I gained from it as a developer was that writing the unit test really clears your mind about how the function should work. So you see at once, you see all the different use cases that you can get in the implementation. So you're able to pinpoint the edge cases before you even start implementing the thing. Because otherwise you start implementing a method and then you find out that in case there is a null or there is an empty list somewhere, then you don't know what to do. If you should return an exception, or if you should return null or whatever, the test will definitely help you in pinpointing that, so that the implementation can have only one way, or you can implement it only in one way. Yeah, there is no ambiguity in how the implementation should work. So from my point of view, I had a really great experience, but I have to say, from a personal point of view, you as a developer need to evolve until you reach that decision, and the decision has to be yours. Otherwise, you're just. But that might be just me.
No, I think it's true, because over the years I've heard maybe people who don't use unit testing a lot complain or talk negatively about the amount of time it takes up front to get started. Like there's a lot of extra time to do that, is the point that they make. And I think they're missing the benefit of, today, if you start just writing code and you know what that code does, when you go back and you look at it like 6 weeks later, or even 6 months later, or even hopefully not 6 years later, but I have that story as well. If you don't have the tests and you want to change something in the middle of a code base, that's a lot of manual QA effort to make sure it works if you haven't touched something in a while. And the flip side of the benefit of, you may spend a little bit more time up front, but I think when you can go back 6 weeks or 6 months later and rerun 30 tests and prove that a new change works, that should be very comforting to a developer, and hopefully save everyone on the team time from having to retest every single thing and avoid regression. So, just the value of having that maintainability makes a lot of sense to me. Now, I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. For example, in Kentico, there is a lot of modules, and nobody really knows if this may affect this module that is on the completely other part of Kentico. And the test gives you this insurance that you didn't break any other module with the changes that you thought were isolated.
Yeah, and I could think that if we look at Kentico today with Service Pack 1 on version 12 and being MVC and having the Kentico admin tool load in the MVC live site, if you have some JavaScript somewhere that's not working in a module, or maybe you have a widget that plays with some JavaScript from Kentico, but also from a customer's or developer's implementation of the MVC live site, like that could cause havoc. And I'm assuming that's not that easy to test for. So I'm kind of curious, Michael, as I talk about this, do you guys utilize this type of testing pretty heavily when it comes to like the MVC widgets and the newer areas of EMS?
Well, I personally don't work at the department which develops these widgets, so I'm not completely sure, but as I said, it's in our definition of done, so I presume that it is covered by test.
Nice. Yeah, and I assume it would be as well. I mean, it's great to hear that it's in the definition of done for Kentico stories, because that's important. So
yeah.
I think what I want to ask you guys is, if you want to do unit testing, or if you are doing unit testing today, what tools are you using? Obviously, it's probably a little bit more than Visual Studio Code. There's probably maybe some libraries out there that help to do this. So, Ondrej, do you have one to use or recommend, even if you don't use it a ton?
So for unit testing JavaScript, I'm a beginner, just like you, Brian. We actually, me and Michal, we did a Twitch session about 2 weeks ago where he taught me some of the basics, and we were using Jest. It's a JavaScript testing framework. I think it was done by Facebook. And I have to say I've been using that ever since for my other projects as well. And I'm just amazed how easy it is. Because if you remember .NET, when we were using I think it was AnyUnit, then you had to set up these text fixtures and decorate every test and so on. But with JavaScript, it was just npm install the package, and then you just write test, the name of the test, and what it should do. So the setup, at least from my point of view, the setup was very easy. And in 1.5 hours, I was completely up to speed, and I was writing tests. I was mocking services, so it was really easy. I don't have experience with other testing libraries, but Jest was definitely a great one from my perspective.
And I'll add the link to that library in the show notes on the podcast as well. But Michael, what about you? Do you have a favorite recommendation?
Well, as you both mentioned, Visual Studio Code is a great tool, and Jest is a great library or a runner for running test. There is even great add-on to Visual Studio Code for Jest, which makes the testing really great, because the tests are run whenever you make a change and save it, and you have code coverage right in the Visual Studio Code. So it's really great. And there is a lot of JavaScript testing library. It depends on what is your project and what kind of libraries do you use. So I'm not sure I could recommend one.
Yeah, as with everything, there's always lots of choices. That's good. I do know that I can add a little bit of the BizStream experience of what our QA department is doing, just because recently we had one of our QA engineers do a lunch and learn on it. His name is Tyler. Tyler uses Cypress, which I think is a pretty common library out there, and he showed us how he's kind of incorporated Cypress scripts into our build process for some of our client projects. Mm-hmm. And it's a pretty neat way where he actually had a site that had to have authentication to get to certain features and functionality, and basically it was probably a 40 or 50 line file of of JavaScript that logged in, clicked a certain area on the site to navigate, and then actually clicked a few action buttons to prove that, at runtime from a user standpoint, this is working just fine. And when he showed that to us, I was like, oh, this is really cool. It almost makes me want to do this more and more if I had the time. But so I know Cypress is one that I think our team is using, and like you guys have both said, there's probably many ones out there. But it's great that maybe those are two choices that if you're new to this and you want to try it out, that's what you can do. And again, we'll put the notes the links in the show notes. So now that's interesting too. From a automation standpoint and from a CI/CD pipeline type of DevOps operation, do you guys think there's a place for testing in that release cycle as well? Not just maybe from a developer, but from like a total deployment and release lifecycle management standpoint.
I think this is on you, Michal, because I've tried Jest, and as far as I checked, it can run automatically in the CI/CD pipelines. But maybe Michal has a real experience with it.
Yeah, I was using Jest and Test Cafe for my project, and for example, GitLab or GitHub, there are prepared templates that you just upload to your project, and tests are run automatically. It just installs the package and run the test on your project, and it's very easy to use, in my opinion.
Great. Yeah, I think that is probably the future of where all these things are going. As all of the projects that we do are pretty much now on either Azure DevOps or GitHub with their actions, that having the tests be run by the developer and being written, and but then incorporating them in the final output and the final products to make sure that artifact is behaving correctly. I think that's just double the value of doing this. So in 2020, I think you'd be almost crazy not to have some level of this automated testing going on.
Brian, what is also great is that we see a lot of websites these days being built on Gatsby or other static site generators. And with Jest, I already started doing that some of the parts of the websites you can also test. You can also test how the source plugins that are actually getting the data work, or how your templates work. And because when you have a static site, you always have to have or in most cases, if you don't want to do manual deployments, you need to have a webhook notification that will actually trigger the build process, right? And as part of that build process, you can also run the unit tests. So I think that's also a great, one of the great ways how to ensure that the website is always working. If you're not even on Azure or other cloud platforms, or you deploy to Netlify, for example. Right. Yeah. So you can incorporate that into the build process, and it's really very, very easy and seamless.
It's great. Yeah, and I'm a fan of those technologies as well, especially when you use Kentico Kontent with them, right? Yeah. So last question, I think, for everyone, and this is definitely, hopefully, informative for the listeners out there. If you aren't doing this today and you want to get started, what's maybe like the first thing to do, or first one or two steps that you'd have to try to add maybe some JavaScript unit testing into your project?
Well, I think that the one thing that is just do it. Just go online, find some tutorial for Jest, or there is plenty of great documentations, various examples and how to start. And I think that you just need to start, and you will develop as you go.
So for me, the biggest problem was that I was frightened from using unit tests in JavaScript, because I had no idea how am I gonna test the things that I do on the website, like reposition elements, the trigger buttons, and things like that. But actually, I found out that it's not about that. Unit testing is again about the single units in the logic of the JavaScript. And when you see how it actually works, I would actually recommend just take a look at the Jest documentation. There is a really nice getting started that really explains everything on a single page. Yeah, so I would say that that's a great resource. Try it out, and you'll see it's not as hard as it seems, because whenever someone says unit test, you already see a lot of work, a lot of time that will go into it. But it's not like that. At least that's my take on it.
Well, great advice from both of you guys. Appreciate that. I'm hoping that if you're listening to this podcast, you're now excited about trying out either Jest or Cypress, or thinking about doing more testing in your development cycles. I think with that, we'll let you guys go. But in case anyone has questions or wants to get hold of you guys, what would be the best way to do that? Ondrej, how should people maybe reach out to you?
So the best way to reach out is Twitter, definitely Twitter. My handle is Ondrej. And apart from that, you can also join my Twitch streams. I Twitch every week, or at least I try to. It's twitch.tv/Ondrej, the same handle for Twitter and Twitch.
Michael, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, for me, it's probably LinkedIn. It's Michal Vanzura on LinkedIn. I don't have Twitter, and I don't stream on Twitch. I'm not very publicly visible, but if you really want to contact me, you can on LinkedIn.
Well, no worries. We'll have people get a hold of Ondrej, and he can get a hold of you for them as well. But very cool. Appreciate it, guys. Again, this has been Kentico Rocks, episode number 30. I'll let you both go back to your days, and thank you very much all for listening.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Bye.
Bye.